Communism and Jehuism are canceled. Recently, Comrade Has of Infrared put a moratorium on Jehuism and, way less more important, zero-hourism.
Guys, let's take an L. Jehu set us back 1 year. Because of Jehu, all of the creative impulses in this community to understand economics in the 21st century was stifled. Because everybody in the community just kept saying, free time, free time, free time. And that's it. Instead of understanding anything about how economics works, everybody just kept bullshitting for a fucking year. Because this Jehu nonsense. So I'm fully cutting the cancer out now. Let's get to fucking work actually building Marxism in the 21st century. I'm sick of this stupid cop-out laziness. You know? And, I'm very close to banning it entirely in IGG. Straight up banning the whole fucking thing.
Personally, I'm for this because they don't fucking exist, you brain-dead twats. In a segment of a live stream he did, Has did what he normally does, confuses meat and potato discussions for middle manager syndrome minutia, like we can't have communism until we know how aisle 7 at the supermarket is going to be shelved. For example, he wants to know how we'll grow food at scale once the state is gone and once the work week is reduced. This is, of course, after strawmanning our argument into everyone will be inert and motionless like radon gas, rotting away on our couches. If he wants an answer, vertical farming is a possibility, emphasis on possibility, which includes hydroponics, aquaponics, and aeroponics, etc. Beyond that, I'd want to reduce the amount of human labor and error in farming, and that includes getting it from point A to point B to family tables. There's a tremendous amount of waste, not just in dumping rates per farm, but in accidents, over-farming, and underutilization of full-scale automation. If he wants a fully detailed answer, he should bring on an agriculturalist, or go to an A&M school and learn for himself. Then, he should promptly shove that degree up his fucking ass. Stop bothering me with it. I'll only have some nominal say in it under communism anyways. I will not be in charge of it. If Has wants to be the Renaissance Ankermensch of the 21st century communism, he is free to try and figure out every aspect of the next society. Of course, I could just ask him back, what about things that can't and shouldn't be produced at scale, like vaccines or pharmaceuticals? Almost every single person has a different immunological and biological profile for which there are adverse side effects. Does Comrade Has his entire worldview fall apart if he can't answer these basic questions in detail? I should hope not, because there are scientists today who are working on individualizing interventions that adapt to our unique physiological structures using pluripotent cells. From induced pluripotent stem cells in personalized medicine, current progress and future perspectives. Given the rapid pace of developments within the iPSC field, it is likely that the future of personalized stem cell therapy will lie in our ability to take a patient's own cells, correct the disease allele, and then return those cells to the patient in a genetically and physiologically correct format. Did Has even know this? I guess I win because I could answer the question and he couldn't. But then again, he truly asked the really important questions like, who will put out fires? Who will take care of his smelly old Lebanese grandmother once Social Security is cut? Who will regulate train accidents? How do we eat? After all, the state has had a monopoly on these for years, and our only real answer to this is that we will have to make these activities redundant by the government. Does Comrade Has have such a low opinion of the human race that he thinks people will let fires burn an entire city down without intervention, or that we will allow even more train derailments than we do under the current existing state? Or that we will somehow allow more rat feces into our food than the FDA presently says is okay? In some instances, yes, he does have a low opinion of humans and wants them re-educated. Mostly, however, he agrees with us. The administrative state must be replaced by human beings taking direct control over such services in the service of humans. Looks like we agree here as well. Then again, during his Tim Pool interview, the motherfucker didn't answer the question of how do we eat either. He said this instead.
Basically, I think clout is more valuable than money today. I don't know if you agree.
But it is. But how do you eat, right? You need money to buy food.
Yeah, that would be a question of I mean, we want to innovate everything. We're basically talking about a fourth industrial revolution. So we must also think about how to innovate the entire financial system, how money works, how currency works, and so on and so on. And I do think that would be connected with things like blockchain technologies.
But I'm not sure I understand, right? if you don't believe in intellectual property,
Yeah.
a signature that I guess I'm trying to wonder, how would I make money? I don't think you've answered it. How do I make money in a situation where I think
how
own the
it
content
would
I
work
produce?
is that if you have an enterprise, and by the way, enterprise is not a dirty word. There were Soviet enterprises. You will be compensated with resources necessary for what you need to do based on your performance.
So resources.
So
Is that money?
if you're successful at reaching people based on your content, then you will be compensated with some kind of, you could call it money, you could call it, Marx theorized about labor vouchers, you can talk about tokens.
Labor vouchers is effectively currency with a restricted currency.
Yeah, it can be called whatever, but yes, effectively you can be compensated with some kind of means of acquiring more based on what you put in.
Money.
Sure.
How innovative. We replaced the valueless dollar with more valueless means of exchange. Why didn't I think of that? Oh, right, I have a developed prefrontal cortex. Tim Pool then asked this question.
So what about, so what's the incentive then for invention if you can't own what you've invented?
Has answers.
I believe credit can be given to people, and notoriety and fame and due glory can be given to inventors and creative geniuses.
That somehow passes for a better answer than the fact that there will be no need for startup capital, no barriers to the sharing of information and generalized knowledge, and no ability to stop people from freely associating to solve any problem within their given field of interest. No, they will be given medals like at the end of Star Wars, according to Has. Fuck you for taking your anger out on us for you fumbling the answer to a question you A, couldn't possibly know the answer to except as one of many possible answers, and B, for never once in this interview detailing what you can do immediately for the working class to make their lives better, like reining in social spending, getting rid of as much government as possible, and the economic benefits it would have on the cost of living, inflation, wages, and yes, even employment. They read right through your sleazy salesmanship tactics. These were some of the comments on the video Haz's army did in AstroTurf with only positive comments. It's just another means of promoting social credit scores and whether you are worthy of eating well, poorly, or not at all. So all he's saying is just regular old communism, but just telling people to work harder and to do it for personal reasons? Man, this guest is totally departed from reality to the point where he's trying to make the argument for what currently exists, i.e., we need something to use to compensate people for work. Yes, it's called money. It exists. It works. No need to change it. What concerns me, though, is whether he thinks answering these questions in detail are a basic prerequisite of communism. Or does he think it's a mass of idle labor and a mass of idle capital which cannot function productively as capital? Materially, these aren't in the same ballpark. It sounds like he's saying we have to let the state keep exploiting us and other states exploiting their social producers until someone answers these questions. Until then, sorry, we have to suffer. Oh, we also have to know how superfluous labor time relates to Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund somehow. It honestly just comes across like Has doesn't want to traverse the Rubicon unless he knows for certain what's on the other side. Oh, right, again, he thinks it'll devolve into Liberia, one of the least developed countries in the world and ranked 171st in GDP out of 195, as opposed to the United States, one of the most developed countries on Earth. There's 475 million guns in the United States, and they're mostly in the hands of law-abiding citizens. What is Has worried about? Again, organized crime that was crushed in 1986 by RICO Acts. He should read my blog post, actually, on Underworld Communism, where I suggest we organize likewise. But if it's not that, then it's the religious zealots' argument that man is born of sin and we're all apex predators waiting to rape each other's wives, swindle our neighbors out of their property, and deny basic life necessities out of Machiavellian urges that only up until now the state has been suppressing. Do I have that right? Because it's the same bullshit I hear from leftists when I tell them I want to deregulate the state. Oh, but that will only make the capitalists stronger. Margaret Mead once said, helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts. We don't have to agree with this in full, of course. She was, after all, particularizing but one of humanity's strongest attributes. Civilization has also developed in heinously bloody and violent manners, cruel even. But that is why Marx also said, morality, religion, metaphysics, all the rest of ideology and their corresponding forms of consciousness thus no longer retain the semblance of independence. They have no history, no development. But men, developing their material production and their material intercourse, alter, along with their real existence, their thinking and the products of their thinking. Thus, the real Rubicon is billions of hours of unnecessary and unproductive labor hours, the division of labor and competition amongst the working class, a working class conditioned by the welfare state, and yes, deflation, i.e., prices go to zero. Once there, they will transform into subjects of their own making, with histories they do make out of the whole cloth, rather than as the outcomes of a process independent of their own making. So go right ahead and cancel Jehuism. Comrade Jehu himself has even said, I 100% agree that MAGA-Com's engagement with Jehuism has been a complete waste of time. As usual, Haz and I agree on everything. I have been 1,000% opposed to Jehuism from the very beginning and believe that it was the worst mistake since we left the ocean. I fully support Haz. In support of Haz's new initiative to eradicate the evil scourge of Jehuism from the ranks of MAGA communism, I urge all communists to read Marx's Capital and become familiar with the labor theory of value, the immortal science of communism. Down with Jehuism. Underneath his contempt for Jehuism, not a thing, and zero-hourism, also not a thing, is his misunderstanding that we do, in fact, agree on most things. Even in his vitriol for Post-Stone, he agrees with them. He says that wage labor plays but a clerical role in society today, and this is precisely what Post-Stone said. He just said it in a long-winded academic fashion. Wage labor reconstitutes itself as necessary, no matter the level of its own productivity. The dual imperatives of capital are ongoing increases in productivity of social labor, and structural reconstitution of the necessity of wage labor despite the increase in productivity. The use value of labor power is not the production of material wealth, but the self-expansion of capital. Only when the abolition of capital is related to the abolition of labor can we begin to approach communism. The general intellect is what prevails in today's society. It's that wage labor is still necessary to the self-expansion of capital, i.e., self-expanding value, that it must appear as necessary just as the state makes the fabled notion of scarcity itself appear as necessary. The real degrowth is occurring in our reliance on an activity whose subsistence is being stripped bare by the state and by this so-called reconstitution as necessity as posited and determined by its own superfluity. Marx. Capital itself is the moving contradiction, in that it presses to reduce labor time to a minimum, while it posits labor time on the other side as sole measure and source of wealth. Hence it diminishes labor time in the necessary form so as to increase it in the superfluous form. Hence posits the superfluous in growing measure as a condition, question of life or death, for the necessary. Free time is misunderstood as a panacea rather than as a weapon that can be used against the state. And if you don't know the history of the state purposely forestalling the shorter work week, then please see Jehu's blog, my blog, Benjamin Klein Honeycutt's book, the NSC 68 document, How Labor Hours Have Not Fallen Since We Exited the Gold Standard, Keynesian full employment policies, and even the capitulation of unions like the AFL-CIO, or more recently the UAW, in sacrificing a shorter work week for higher wages that will only be eaten away by inflation at a later date. Free time is also time we would need during any sort of transition period, in which communist society is still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society from whose womb it emerges, in which people will have to adjust, mediate reproduction of society sans money, sans alienated labor, sans the welfare state, and plan anew what they want that to look like, not what King Haz wants, for he will be but a bit player like everyone else. It is not a diabolical scheme like we're masterminds who just discovered this. However, it should be of some intrigue to Comrade Haz that the labor movement almost immediately dropped it as a demand after the Great Depression, i.e. the breakdown of exchange value. And even the CPUSA were conciliatory as early as 1945, purged from labor unions and all manners of struggle by World War II's end. This was not an accident. Labor hours had to be expanded indefinitely. Haz then wants us to explain the correlation of superfluous labor time to other commodities. Other commodities are subject to a variety of factors. Labor power is not. We can actually measure the amount of socially necessary labor time in gold terms compared to constant dollars. We don't know for certain, but this has never been reproduced by anyone other than myself and a few others. But the divergence between the two measures is the same thing as inflation itself. It just happens to pool in specific areas of the economy: education, healthcare, housing, etc. The other claim is that we think getting rid of the state and getting rid of billions of unnecessary labor will have an instantaneous effect, and voila, communism. Of course, I never made this claim. I followed Comrade Engels' quote. It's just as impossible to determine absolutely the moment of death, for physiology proves that death is not an instantaneous, momentary phenomenon, but a very protracted process. We believe we are not only in that protracted process now, but a deflationary event would only amount to a sudden stop in the downward pressure on wages themselves in the short term. Drawn out, we believe this makes the buying and selling of labor power unprofitable altogether, as the state can no longer cut wages to drive up the rate of surplus value, and further concentrates capital into fewer and fewer hands as capitals race to kill one another off to make up for said lost surplus value. Whereas unproductive capital already enters the state as unproductive capital since it begins and ends as excess, if the capitalist had to employ it, it would, per Marx, only further drive down profits and raise wages. The increased capital C plus delta C would produce no more or even less profit than capital C before its expansion by delta C. In both cases, there would be a steep and sudden fall in the general rate of profit, but this time due to a change in the composition of capital not caused by the development of the productive forces, but rather by a rise in the money value of the variable capital because of increased wages and the corresponding reduction in the proportion of surplus labor to necessary labor. This is also why we're interested in Javier Milei. Your purity politics is a dead giveaway into creating that Jehu and I are Zionists because we're interested in this experiment to dollarize and downsize the state. It would also be nice to see Austrian school economics fail in real time, too. Anyways, I've provided numerous examples of rapid acceleration for economies that chose to dollarize. You've provided me with nothing but bullshit questions you should ask experts, not me. Ask someone from Lake Superior University's fire technology program about how to put out fires, you fucking idiot. I honestly don't care. I care about not living under the society for one more second than necessary, not fielding your book of questions like some deranged Arabic owl. Who will do this? Who will do that? Who? He only trots out the straw man that we believe Javier Milei will usher in communism. I've never claimed anything of the sort. I've said, I don't think Comrade understands our position, nor does he understand our intrigue of the kinds of actions Milei is attempting to undertake in his proposal for a hardcore neoliberalization, shock therapy, of Argentina's state. He is advocating to go beyond anything we've ever seen before in the era of the New Deal and Keynesianism. Comrade Jehu and I don't believe this will lead to communism. We do believe, however, Milei's actions might serve to inspire copycats in America, where such actions could actually matter towards global communization. Comrade is unfortunately stuck in the mindset of the nation-state. This is Marxist necrophilia, in my opinion. If he's upset that sovereignty has been completely undercut from the working class, forcing our submission to the world market, then it shouldn't be too hard to grasp that the world market is a product of our activity in the first place. It's right there in Volume 3, Chapter 15. Furthermore, he wants to know how such actions would lead to communism if we were to reduce hours of labor or balance the budget, or better yet, do both. If Comrade didn't already know about the last time we did balance the budget, this caused a massive deflationary crisis in Asia. China barely escaped. It should be obvious as to why. Their exports were denominated in dollars. This only gives us a partial glimpse into what could happen if we intentionally did it, and then didn't reinflate asset prices and lower interest rates to zero, which is what immediately followed in the Bush presidency. Furthermore, deflation has been the bugaboo of the fascist state for quite some time. Bernanke himself is on record as saying so. A healthy, well-capitalized banking system and smoothly functioning capital markets are an important line of defense against deflationary shocks. Thus, as I have stressed already, prevention of deflation remains preferable to having to cure it. If we do fall in deflation, however, we can take comfort that the logic of the printing press example must assert itself, and sufficient injections of money will ultimately always reverse a deflation. We want to cause a deflationary event they can't escape. This is our interest in Milei's extremist positions in seeing, should he shutter the central bank, and should he remove all capital controls along with relinquishing your normative fiscal and monetary controls, plus axing most of his public sector, is he willing to let deflation run amok in his economy without either resorting back to a quasi-Peronism, or will the light in his brain turn on and realize he has to shorten the work week to accommodate the massive unemployment labor markets can't absorb? If you're not interested in this, then change the channel, motherfucker. You're a grown-up. No one is forcing you to read my blog, read about Milei, or even see it. Be the tyrant over your shitty little internet fiefdom and permaban anyone who brings him up. Finally, why I don't do debates, much to your dismay, and am more than enthusiastic in renouncing Jehuism, I am less gracious than Jehu, and frankly, you're weak and your horde is illiterate if one person set you back, didn't have to be in your Discord to do so, and everyone was just chanting free time without understanding the implications of it or how it impacted capital and the state. That is not our fault that you've recruited the dregs of society. For us, free time is not idleness. It constitutes a new form of human wealth. Why the fuck else would Marx quote the source and the remedy in the Grundrisse? Wealth is not command over surplus labor time, real wealth, but rather disposable time outside that needed in direct production for every individual and the whole society. Why wouldn't he just say free time is part of communism? Probably because he realized that for-profit production only accidentally means to create the conditions for it. We of course know free time is not material goods or manifests magically into life necessities. You're the only fucktards who believe we think that. It's time for personal growth, time for experimentation, time for all-around human development, time to figure out how to harness even more energy for more growth and more abundance, time to figure out the very life processes themselves rather than just being determined by them, and time for figuring out new forms of self-organization. This was a privilege only reserved for the few. Now it is the birthright of all. Yes, leisure is part of this as well, but not as a precursor to communism. Withholding hours of labor directed against the state with the strongest unions, which would safeguard the areas we vitally need, such as energy, food, transportation, etc., with those dissidents who are tired of the existing state, is indeed a general strike. But it's a strike that doesn't end. It's a strike where we make clear demands against the government that it surely doesn't want to engage itself in, like balancing its budget, reducing its own workforce, and curtailing its own social spending, and thus its own hogging of the resources that should be entering into our consumption. So I have to reiterate, fuck you. You don't understand our arguments, and no amount of your jibber-jabber about real estate speculation or the energy economy and international oil, the supply chains of chip manufacturing and the creation of modern surpluses and profits, or ecological economics will impress me. We get it. You've read Michael Hudson, Parenti, probably Barron, Sweezy, and possibly even Herman Daly and others I'm sure I didn't mention. When they can explain to me why commodity money evaporated from circulation after almost 5,000 years, then I'll give a shit. Until then, you actually side with morons like Chris Arthur and the other value form school dipshits who simultaneously agree with the bourgeois economists that anything can serve as money, as measure of value, even something that doesn't contain one scintilla of fucking value. Your starting point is no different than the Marxite hacks you decry. Look, everyone in the communist community thinks they're right. You've proven nothing, and I've proven nothing. I implore you to get your shit together, form your little party, and do what needs to be done. If a nobody like me can distract you, you aren't worthy of being called a leader. I refuse to be your scapegoat for why you're a failure in your own community that you have full autonomy over. And if you happen to die, it won't take any meaning away from my life as you claim. I'll just piss on your grave and continue writing my blog until some other assholes come along with their grand vision for communist society. Then I'll probably bother them too. Don't get mad at me, this is nothing compared to the wrath that the state will rain down upon you if you ever form a live organization. Anyways, I bloviated enough, gotten it out of my system. Until then, munch on my cock, you bearded Beiruti bitch. It ain't that serious. Listen to your friend John Zerka.
My opinion is always internet beef should never be serious or else both parties look retarded.
This video was not meant to be exhaustive or as precise as some of my blog posts, and you can watch the entirety of Haz's criticisms in the link below. However, you'll see Haz just goes through a list of he literally believes this, or they literally believe in that, and exposes how little he actually grasps our arguments. How much he relies on Lenin's outdated political economy that can't answer the inverted political economy we live under now. That of one with a constantly decomposition of exchange value. Money. Haz takes this to mean, like some Sanderista, that we have socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. This is partly true, but it doesn't get to the heart of what fascism is any more than Dmitriev's worthless essays and speeches do. I feel his use of the word Marxoid, applied to us, is his aversion to understanding how the labor theory of value applies post-breakdown. His obsession with trying to pin you down on dumb, gish-galloping questions are a debate tactic to avoid actual problems that Keynesian and post-Keynesian policy making which he also doesn't understand, as critical to upholding the production and realization of surplus value, something he for sure does not believe exists anymore, yet is still vital to the mode of production, despite its source being entirely anachronistic to material output, or, as he agrees with Postone, clerical in function. Haz's supposed pragmatism is nothing more than egomaniacal posturing, as if he's some misunderstood polymath, master of the disciplines that are required to reproduce not just this society, but a communist one, and, a la Faust, possesses ultimate knowledge, logic, reasoning, and special insight into how that society will ultimately function. Marx left it open-ended for a reason. It will be nothing like we've ever seen or can rationally calculate. Haz wants it both ways. On the one hand, he believes he can have a universal metric for human activity. On the other hand, it will be entirely subjective from the standpoint of that humans' needs and wants, abilities, and how they choose to reproduce themselves. My personal message to Haz is this: you're not some mastermind. You're not that savant from Good Will Hunting. You could probably teach community college level history if you weren't a streamer. You had one interesting idea: MAGA communism, and you're letting it slip through your fingers because you're still trying to sell something to MAGA they don't want, even if their movement is inherently communist. Lastly, I'm not going to be lectured by some FDR New Dealer cockwriter just because Stalin didn't understand that the rise in fascism in Europe was contiguous to the very problems FDR's New Deal was attempting to solve through not just corporatizing the state, but doing exactly what Grossman predicted would have to be done, and which was accomplished legally when wages were destroyed. Haz can ignore it all he wants, it's only to his own detriment. He has more of a responsibility as a communist to bring capital and the state crashing down than he does in worrying what comes after. There are too many variables at play. But he could focus on trying to craft a message that doesn't sound like absolute lunacy to the average American dissident. He always complains that no one else knows how to read the room, but when the comment sections are filled with negative reaction by the very people he says will be responsive to his ideas regarding how some future America will look like, he refuses to adapt. For example, he moans that we're for open borders, and yet we actually have a plan that would limit out-migration and reduce spending, and subsidies on protected commodities like corn. NAFTA was an enormous driver of illegal immigration. It's a much more elegant solution, still worker-friendly, and consonant with our aims to reduce government outlays. You could shut down the border, but without removing the subsidy that is crushing Mexican agro prices, you're just pandering. You whined that the DSA, PSL, and other leftist scourges created a hug box, and you've yet to demonstrate you're much different other than some basic aesthetics and saying you're conservative, when, in fact, the Soviet Union was far more conservative than any of the fairies you court. That being said, I still like some of your members. Rev seems to get it. Kareem is intelligent. Even that fat fucking wannabe Gen X Viking Chris Morlack has a few brain cells in his wobbly shaped noggin, but many are just mindless fanboys in a Z-list cult of personality. This will be my last video and say on your group though. Now get your asses to work and stop being little bitches who blame their shortcomings on two people with zero influence, seek no influence, and for whom you could have just ignored. We're not wreckers. For that to be possible, there'd have to be something substantial to wreck in the first place.